Good morning and welcome to Nurturing Nature, Fostering Biodiversity on Farms webinar. And thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm speaking to you today from Regina, Saskatchewan, situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the Nihiwa, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Méchief nations. So before we get started, we're just going to do a little housekeeping, and the key things are, if your video or audio is going a little wonky, just make sure that any background programs that you have are closed down on your computer. Everybody is in listen-only mode, so if you just have a quick look to where that arrow is pointing, you'll notice it says questions. And if you do have any questions for the speakers or for Sask Organics, please just type them in there and we'll do our best to answer them during the webinar. And if you are joining by phone, you will have been prompted to enter an audio PIN after joining the webinar. And if you didn't enter your PIN, please ensure your phone is muted at all times so we don't get the background noise in the webinar. There will be time at the end of each presentation for questions. So again, just encouraging you to type those as you think of them so that we can answer them during the allotted time. The webinar is being recorded, so attendees will receive an email with the link to the webinar in about 24 hours from now. And finally, please bear with us. We sometimes are experiencing some technical glitches, but we're getting better with each one, and we're going to do our best to make this run as smoothly as possible for you. Both of our presenters today have provided you with handouts. So again, if you just look at that arrow, and you will see on your control panel that there's a place for you to download those handouts. So you can do that during the webinar as well. And after our last webinar, Deb actually sent those handouts out to everybody who was on the call, just in case you didn't get time to do it during the webinar itself. And of course, we can't do this without our sponsors, so thank you so much to our gold sponsor, Grain Millers, and our bronze sponsors, Sunrise Food International and ProCert Organics, who you can see are celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. And just a little bit about Sask Organics. So we're the industry association for certified organic farmers and processors in the province. We're a farmer-led nonprofit membership organization, and you can see there that we represent 964 organic crop producers, 1,050 certified organic entities, and there's 1.155 million acres of organic farmland in the province. And on now to why we're all really here is to hear from our guest speakers, and we'd like to thank them so much in advance for being here with us today. So we have Stephanie from the Xerces Society and Shirley from the Habitat Stewardship she's a Habitat Stewardship Coordinator at Nature Saskatchewan. And I'll start just by providing you with just a brief introduction or bio for Stephanie. On our website, you can see their full bios. So Stephanie is an agronomist and native plant materials specialist at Xerces Society. Stephanie provides pollinator habitat expertise to farms in Canada and the US, and she also works with the native seed industry and researchers to plan and develop seed supply of important plant species for restoration of insect habitat. So over to you, Stephanie.
Talking again. Thank you, Marla, for the introduction, and it's great to be here with everyone, connected to you remotely, wherever you are. I'm based in Northwest Indiana, between Chicago and Indianapolis, and I would like to start by first acknowledging and honoring the Indigenous communities native to this region, to my region, and recognize that the current homes and farms and cities are built on Indigenous homelands and resources. I recognize the Miami, the Kickapoo, the Potawatomi, and the Shawnee peoples as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. So I hope, let's see, I'm gonna minimize this as well. How are things looking there then, screen-wise?
You're good. We can see your screen.
Okay, great. So yeah, I worked with Marla and Deb at Sask Organics to first start things off with a little poll here. And the question is just, what comes to mind when you hear the word bee? Can you pull that up? Great. And I'm not sure that I can see the poll, but so guide me through that, Deb, and we'll give everyone a few more seconds here to finish filling in their answer. And then Deb, if you would just read out what the results are, please.
Well, we actually didn't have, I don't know if people weren't able to vote, but there wasn't a vote on any of the options. So I'm not sure if something went wrong with the poll there. So I apologize if you were not able to.
Okay. Well, anyway, in your mind, go ahead and think about what comes to mind when you hear the word bee. And here, you know, are some of the potential answers that were available in the poll. But essentially, this is just to get us thinking and talking about whether we see how familiar we are with bees and the services and products and what their biology is, excuse me, and whether we see them as potential danger or as allies. So actually, I'm losing a little bit of, there we go. We may also, of course, think of bees as pollinators. So more than 85% of flowering plants require an animal. In most cases, this is an insect to move pollen. And in North America, there are roughly 4,000 species of native bees, and the European honeybee is not native. Pollinators are also important, not just because they pollinate flowers, but the seeds that grow from those flowers are an important source of new plants for future generations of food for birds and other wildlife. And then the insects themselves are also food for birds, especially for chicks, and on up through our food chain and food webs. And then also the habitat where pollinators live is important for other wildlife. And even the grizzly bear is pollinator dependent. When they're eating salmon, are insect dependent. When they're eating salmon, those salmon have grown on a lot of aquatic insects. And also, of course, a great part of bears' diets is foraging, all those wild berries and other plant-based foods that have come thanks to pollination. When we think of insect pollinators, there are 6 main groups: butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, wasps, and bees. But of course, there's growing evidence and research that just shows how much decline and risk and threats that we're seeing to our insect and pollinator populations. So here you can see the 4 main categories of the threats to or the explanations behind pollinator decline. And those are habitat loss, pesticides, disease and non-natives, and climate change. And of course, at the bottom of each arrow are actions that we can all take to help mitigate and reduce those threats. And what I'll be focusing on today is talking more about conserving and creating habitat, reducing reliance on pesticides, and planning for species and habitat diversity. This, I apologize, it's focused on the US from data from our Department of Agriculture, but it just shows if you kind of broke down acres of land across the country into what types of uses they're in. You can see how much these grasslands here, the yellow are, this is cropland, and the browns, the more timber or forested areas are in the green. Urban things are up in the pink. and our actual wild places are in blue. And if you just group this, you know, in a different way, you can just see how these sort of productive uses, this again was pasture and rangeland, forest, and the brown is cropland, how important those working landscapes are in terms of the area they cover, and why in order to have effective conservation, we need to have conservation measures on those working lands. So just a quick aside here about the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. We are the world's largest pollinator conservation and pollinator habitat organization. We have roughly 50 staff, and we're based in about a dozen different states around the US. And our team here focuses primarily on pollinators, agricultural biodiversity, also endangered species, aquatic invertebrates like the mussel pictured in the upper right, pesticide mitigation and policy, and also focus on urban conservation. We work with over 100 scientists from around the world, lots of government agencies, hundreds of farmers to put in that habitat and protect those pollinators and beneficial insects on farms. Many foundations, and we have thousands of citizen scientists helping us collect data. And we also work with over 50 companies to make our world a better place. And one of those is General Mills, and in particular, relevant to our audience in Saskatchewan is the project with Cheerios. So through their Honey Nut Cheerios brand, General Mills has been holding a campaign called Bring Back the Bees. Featured here on the left, that's from the Canadian website, and then on the right is also what some of their conservation work it looks like on the website in terms of on the US side and their focus on bees. And then also as a large food company, this is the screenshot of their 2020 Global Responsibility Report. And sort of here under Planet, you can see how they're working on these themes of climate change, water stewardship, regenerative agriculture, sustainable sourcing, and responsible sourcing. And we even have, you know, Cheerios were the featured product on this page. So our partnership between Xerces and General Mills goes back for more than a decade and involves several different brands and farms. But this particular program works with farmers who are growing oats for grain, or they're in the sourcing regions where General Mills sources oats, and farmers who are interested in using a variety of crop rotations and conservation practices, who are willing to plant diverse forage blends and wildflower seed mixes, growers who are committed to maintain these pollinator plantings for at least 5 years, and that they're able to protect them from pesticide impact, and who are also enthusiastic to share their story with friends, family, neighbors, and our audiences at Xerces and General Mills. So the program, what the program provides is the cost of seeds. We generate the seed mix. We work with the farmer to develop a custom seed mix for their needs, and then have that seed mix shipped or delivered to them, and also provide technical support for choosing which site, mitigating any pesticide risk, guiding the farmer through site prep and planting, and then through maintenance. Farmers have a lot of experience growing different crops, but these perennial pollinator habitat mixes are a bit different as well. So there's a learning curve as far as knowing what to expect and managing for weeds. And these two slides I just showed, there's quite a lot of words on them, and this is all summarized in the flyer, which is one of the attachments that's included here on the webinar. And I just also need to really recognize and appreciate all the partners who make this habitat work possible. Of course, the farmers, different grain buyers like Patterson Grain. We have the seed producers or the seed vendors. So we work a lot with North Star Seed. We work with Skinner Native Seeds. We work with Prairie Originals, all out of their Manitoba locations. On the US side, we're working with our Natural Resource Conservation Service, other conservation districts and watersheds, Nature Saskatchewan, Sask Organics, the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan, as well as many other government and conservation groups in Manitoba and Canada. Next, I just have a few examples that I would like to give about some of the habitat projects that we put in. This is with the Manitoba Beef and Forage Initiative at one of their sites in Brandon. So this was a pasture and a series of paddocks where it had really become grass dominated. And so our question here was, what methods and which species can we interseed? If we add seeds to this degraded pasture, can we enhance the value, the forage value for both the cattle as well as for pollinators? And we took kind of a two-prong approach here. You see the list of species. The top ones are a few forage legumes. Sainfoin is something I think that's just kind of fairly new on the scene. It's from Northern Europe, another flowering legume. And then this list here, below the dashed line are a lot of the native wildflowers that provide pollen and nectar pollinators. So here's kind of a lot of the partners and team members looking at the site. And even though this photo was just a few months after it was planted, you can't see much in this view, but the close-up view in the upper right actually shows, I think, 4 or 5 of those plants from that seed mix were really large and in some cases blooming only a few months after planting. So those were some encouraging results. And then the second year, which was 2019, seeds were planted again. These photos are in September. It had already frosted here. So what you're seeing here is this kind of dark orange color is buckwheat, which is a great plant for pollinators, and it had already been nipped by a frost here. But you can tell that prior to the frost, this field had a lot of buckwheat in the front here. In the center photo is Phacelia, which is also a great pollinator plant. And then on the left is Maximilian Sunflower. And this was on my opening slide, and I don't know if many of you spotted it because it was kind of camouflaged, but there is a bumblebee here at the base of that flower. It had probably spent the night there, and as it got too cold, it just hung on and spent the night. And this was still early enough in the morning that it hadn't quite warmed up yet. And that's probably Bombus huntii. It's a little bit difficult to tell, but that's a species. This was taken in Manitoba. That's a species that's more common in Saskatchewan. This is Scott Beaton. He's a regenerative grower in Stonewall, Manitoba, who's transitioning to organic. And this is a strip where he's put in pollinator habitat. Again, this was just a few months after it was first planted. So in the left photo, it may not look like much. He's been mowing it to manage for weeds. And as the years go by, the required mowing will decrease. But some of these close-up photos show all these different clovers, and that's buckwheat in the top center with a drone fly on it. And all this equipment there on the left photo is part of Jason Gibbs and Yvonne Lawley's and their team, the research that they're doing. I think they gave a presentation in the previous webinar in this series talking about this work. So Scott's one of their participating farmers, and we're really excited to partner and have our habitat areas serve this dual purpose of also functioning as research sites so that the community as a whole can learn more about which insects are using these pollinator strips and how the plants are growing in them and if the plants are growing out into the crops or not. This slide just shows the planning phase here. So on the left is an area in Saskatchewan where a pollinator seed mix is going in. You can see it's more of a mosaic of natural areas with cropped areas. And on the right is another participating farmers map from South Central Manitoba, where we've mapped out some different areas along creeks and in both the farmyard as well as along ditches and fields. And again, just another example mix here of where we put in some native grasses and native pollinator plants, as well as some of the tame forage species. And this slide is a lot of scientific names of plants, but what this is intended to show you is just the diversity. So here's a native seed mix that we're really excited to be able to work with John Skinner, pictured there in the upper right, and his company, Skinner Native Seeds. They're out of Roblin, Manitoba, very close to the Saskatchewan, to the line with Saskatchewan. And here in green are all of the forbs or the wildflowers that are not legumes. So 34 of those are in the mix, 10 grasses in the dark gray, 8 native legumes in the blue, and then one shrub, a wild rose, in the black there. So John's been working to both collect and grow these seeds in some of his fields. There he is in the upper right, looking at some gray leaf, or I'm sorry, oval-leafed milkweed, which is the only milkweed species that grows that far north, and of course is the essential host plant for the larvae of monarch butterflies. And then finally here, this is my last slide. So I've left a little time for questions or discussion here, but this again is just showing a mosaic of all the partners that we have, from these diverse seed mixes to some of those plants like purple prairie clover featured here with the Sanderson's bumblebee on it, our growers, our research and student teams, and some of the team in Brandon who collect a lot of bees and are creating a great library of native bees for the Northern Great Plains. And then even on the Cheerios boxes there on the shelf, that was from a promotion this past Pollinator Week, where they featured this habitat program on their farm. And then coming around on the last row to the right of that, that's just showing a field that's been prepared. So often these are going in on the edges of fields between the main crop field and a tree line, or in wetter areas, or sort of odd corners of fields and farms. So with that, I'm ready to wrap things up here. And I can, of course, if you're interested, please reach out to me by email or phone. We kind of start things off with an intake interview where I learn from the grower about their interest in participating in the program and learn a few more details about their farm, and also go through the next steps for planning and then for getting the site ready and the seeds delivered. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was an excellent presentation, and always good to know about programs that are available to farmers who are interested in developing habitats and ecosystems like you've described. So that's excellent. And it's funny. I always find that, or I always say that to make change, it's a very personal thing. I mean, policies and institutions are super important, but I think that every individual will have an epiphany, like a moment, right? Or hear a bit of information where they're like, now I get it. And that actually happened for me here during your presentation. And it was when you were talking about the insect, salmon, bear connection, right? And then I went, oh, biodiversity, which is all about the variety of life in the world, or an ecosystem or a habitat, which then made my brain go to, we make this false separation or polarization between food production and nature, right? When really it's all part of the same ecosystem or world. So for me, that really brought home the importance of breaking down that distinction, that it is all, like, we're all one, really, all part of a larger whole, and we have our places in it and roles to play. And this is projects like yours and the one that Shirley will be talking about next are a way of breaking down or connecting, maybe that's a better way of saying, connecting food production and nature. So anyway, I thought I'd share my moment. So
exactly.
Thank you for that, because it really, I always kind of get excited when something like that happens. And we did have one question that came up during your presentation, and it was with regard to General Mills and whether or not they have a glyphosate policy. Or a glyphosate use policy, which makes sense because we're a group of organic farmers and glyphosate is a non-permitted substance in our production system. And I don't know, if you have, the answer or an answer to that question. So I'll go to you first. And if I have some words too, but I'll let you go first.
Okay, good. That's a great question to bring up. So I cannot speak for General Mills, and I am not, up to date on their most recent policy or what's required of growers. In general, with Cheerios, with the oats that are going to Cheerios, there is not currently an organic stream for that, I believe. There's just kind of such a high demand for oats for Cheerios that the sourcing teams are working on that, and they would like to have organic Cheerios, but organic oats do not go to Cheerios right now. So that's one kind of bit of information to separate organic growers from the ingredients in Cheerios currently. The other point, though, is that this program is not restricted to growers who are only growing oats only for General Mills. It's very open. It's for growers, whether they're organic or conventional or practicing regenerative agriculture or just interested in adding more biodiversity to their land, and that they're in these general oat growing regions. So I appreciate the question about glyphosate use. I think it's a really important issue to address in food production, in the way we treat our soil, water, earth, people, and animals. But it shouldn't be considered like a deal breaker for participating in this program.
Right, and also I know that, well, I'm not 100% sure, but two of the largest oat buyers on the prairies probably are Grain Millers, based in Yorkton, and then Richardson's. And Grain Millers has had for a number of years a policy for their conventional oats to that they don't allow desiccation or pre-harvest application of glyphosate for the oats. And then it was just in the Western Producer 2 days ago that Richardson's has also adopted a similar policy. And I suspect that General Mills does buy buy oats from those two folks. It doesn't mean that they're not using glyphosate at other times during the year, but it is a step towards the reduction of the use of the pesticides. So that's good news. So thank you, Stephanie, again so much, and we really appreciate you being here with us. Thank you. All right. So now we're moving on to our second presentation. So I would like to welcome Shirley. Shirley is the Habitat Stewardship Coordinator with Nature Saskatchewan. She completed a BSc in Wildlife Management, worked as a field biologist for 10 years, and then completed an MSc in Biology. Shirley delights in sharing her passion for stewardships of rare species and in reciprocal learning about conservation and restoration of native ecosystems. While in her temporary position as Habitat Stewardship Coordinator, Shirley is looking forward to applying her experience engaging with multi-use landowners and monitoring species at risk. So over to you, Shirley, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Marla. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you, and we can see your screen, or we can see us screen.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm hoping that I can move my picture of myself. Do you see my picture of myself? It's in the middle of my screen.
Oh, yeah, that's how, yeah.
Okay, that's good. As long as it's not in the way of people looking at the screen, that's fine. Okay.
No, yeah, for sure.
So thank you, Marla and Deb and Sask Organics for hosting this webinar. It's been great so far. My name is Shirley Bartz, as Marla noted, and I'm the Habitat Stewardship Coordinator for a number of the programs at Nature Saskatchewan. And today I'll be giving you an overview of Nature Saskatchewan's habitat, an overview of their history and of their habitat conservation and species stewardship programs, as well as a little bit of information on their habitat enhancement programs. And there are going to be some slides that I need to read my notes for, just because they are they're a little bit outside of the work that I also do with Nature Sask, and I want to be able to stay within the time limits. So on with it. Okay, trying to get my slides to move forward. Okay, that's not moving forward for me.
Shirley, try. There should be on the bottom left hand, there should be a little icons to move it forward, or you can just click on the center of the screen.
Oh, I see it. Okay. Drawing tools. Okay. Let's just try that. There we go. Okay. So beginning with a really brief history of Nature Saskatchewan. It was founded a little over 70 years ago as a naturalist society, and it was meant to give its members some inspiration and appreciation for their natural habitat, as well as encourage them to speak to their lawmakers. And in the 1960s and 80s, Nature Saskatchewan started campaigning for and eventually was successful in establishing Grasslands National Park. In the 1980s, they began to focus a bit more on research that supported natural ecosystems and species at risk. And now most of the efforts and activities at Nature Saskatchewan go into their full-time programming in programs like Stewards of Saskatchewan and some of the others I'll discuss later. We've got 7 full-time staff, up from an original 2. And depending on our funding, we sometimes have summer staff as well. So we've got a number of different programs at Nature Saskatchewan. The first one that I'm going to describe is the Last Mountain Bird Observatory, which is a small research station where scientists and volunteers have monitored migrating songbirds in Saskatchewan for more than 20 years. We also coordinate important bird areas, a network of important bird areas, or IBAs as they're also known, through Saskatchewan. And these are areas where there are large groups of rare species of birds that congregate and where birders and naturalists monitor those populations. There are 53 IBAs in Saskatchewan that Nature Saskatchewan helps with. We also coordinate the Saskatchewan portion of the International Piping Plover Census, which is an international effort to count all adult piping plovers across North America every 5 years. There are over 100 volunteers that take part in these surveys, and Nature Saskatchewan runs the Saskatchewan portion of that program. The last one took place in 2016, and the next one will take place next year. Nature Saskatchewan's programming for northern communities includes a program called Inner Nature and Nature Quest, which are in-class and outdoor presentations for children in grades 5 through 12 throughout northern and central Saskatchewan. We also partner with Nature Canada to deliver citizen science programs such as Naturehood, which connects people of all ages to the nature around them, as well as Nature Watch, which is comprised of Plant Watch, Worm Watch, Ice Watch, and Frog Watch. And those are Canada-wide programs that get citizen scientists to record the timing of those natural events. Nature Sask also delivers the Stewards of Saskatchewan programs, which is where I work. So Stewards of Saskatchewan is a suite of programs, or a banner program under which a number of other stewardship programs are listed. And it's run by habitat stewardship coordinators like me. And it focuses on species at risk, which we refer to as conservation ambassadors. So the Stewards of Saskatchewan programs collaborate with landowners to keep an eye out for species at risk on their land. And our ambassador species include burrowing owl and piping plover, monarch butterfly, loggerhead shrikes, as well as plant species like western spiderwort, small-flowered sand verbena, and the bootalua grass species down there at the bottom. When a landowner enrolls in our stewardship programs, they enter into a non-legally binding handshake agreement that they can end at any time. Our agreement with them is that they'll keep an eye out for certain species that occur on their land and collect information about the number of adults and babies that they see each year. And we give them a beautiful metal gate sign with their name on it if they wish, and the name of the program they're enrolled in, as well as invitations to a number of free events such as a conservation supper and any information that they need to satisfy their curiosity or help them locate and identify and count the species that are on their land. So let's talk a little bit about these programs. The first one we've developed is called Operation Burrowing Owl, and it focuses on the endangered species of burrowing owls. It was launched in 1987, and it's the longest running voluntary stewardship program in Canada, with about 360 participants conserving about 150,000 acres of land for burrowing owls, as well as other species of wildlife that live with them. Another program we have is called Shrubs for Shrikes, and it focuses on the threatened species of loggerhead shrikes, also known as the butcher bird, because they impale their prey items on barbed wire and historically on hawthorn and other shrubs with spikes on them or thorns. Shrubs for Shrikes was established in 2013, and it's got about 250 participants conserving a little over 73,000 acres of land. Another one of our programs is called Plovers on Shore, or Plovers as they're called here in Canada. And this focuses on piping plovers, and these are little species of shorebirds that nest on beaches. They have very cryptic babies and eggs. The babies can run within an hour of hatching. They're very exciting species for me. They are endangered, and our Plovers on Shore program started in 2008. We've got over 60 participants conserving about 130 miles of shoreline where these birds breed. It's also interesting to note that piping plovers were the first species to have critical habitat designated in Saskatchewan. So our Stewards of Saskatchewan program falls under the banner of Stewards of Saskatchewan, and SOS, as we refer to it, is sort of a catch-all for a number of different species at risk. Whoops, too fast. There are about 226 participants that have enrolled since 2010. They're conserving over 41,000 acres of land. And as I mentioned, this program supports landowners and land managers with a host of different species at risk that might occur on their land. So this is a list from our brochure, which I've given to Sask Organics to post as one of the supplemental handouts that we've provided. And we've got a whole bunch of species at risk that are included in the Stewards of Saskatchewan program. There are amphibians and reptiles, butterflies and birds, and some mammals as well. So I'm just going to go over a few of the species at risk that are included in the Stewards of Saskatchewan program. This first one is a monarch butterfly, and you'll see in the lower picture the viceroy butterfly, which is a mimic of the monarch. You'll notice that in the viceroy's hind wing and forewing, there's a horizontal bar that crosses through the panes of color on each of those wings. And this is a good way to distinguish it from the monarch, which does not have those horizontal bars. If you get close enough to a monarch and it's cooperating for you, you might see the white stripes across its abdomen or the two stripes on its thorax, its body. Another one of the species that we include in Stewards of Saskatchewan are common nighthawks, which are actually not hawks at all. They're more closely related to barn swallows or other birds that hunt insects on the wing. These are really cryptically colored birds. They like to nest and hang out on backgrounds where their bodies and their eggs and their young blend right into the background. A lot of the times people see them before they hear them, and I wanted to play their sound for you. It is something that I'm pulling off of the All About Birds website, which is hosted by the Cornell University Lab of Ornithology. They have an app that you can put on your phone called Merlin, and here is the call of the common nighthawk. So it's just a raspy buzz that continues over and over as they fly around defending their territory. They also make a sound when they're kind of diving out of the air. It sounds like a buzz, and it's going to come up now. Yeah, it's kind of like a sound. Very exciting, in my opinion. So that is the common nighthawk. That's a threatened species. The monarch butterfly, I forgot to mention, is a species of special concern, but it's being suggested by COSIWA to be moved up to endangered. Another one of my favorites that I'm seeing a lot right now, because I'm in the field out here near Gull Lake, is the Fruginus Hawk. And Fruginus hawks are the largest hawk species that we have in the province. They can be identified because they have a white throat and chest and belly and a white tail. They also have red chaps on their legs, or red pantaloons that they've got. You can see that sometimes when they're flying. If you get a chance to see one up close through binoculars, or because it's a young bird sitting on a fence post, you might also notice that they wear yellow lipstick. This is called the gape on a bird. It's basically the depth that their beak opens up. And on a Fruginus hawk, the yellow line of the mouth that you can see there in that lower picture extends all the way back to the middle of its eye. So that's an easy way, if you can get that close, to identify that hawk from a Swainson's hawk or a red-tailed hawk. If you just happen to see these birds flying, you'll note that the Fruginus hawk's belly is white and their tail is white, and a lot of their underwing feathers are also white. So this threatened species is fairly easy to identify if you can get it flying, because it has very little marking on its breast. The juveniles do have a pink bib that they wear, which is a little bit similar to a Swainson's hawk, who has a darker charcoaly bib. So we also have a program called Rare Plant Rescue, and Rare Plant Rescue was initiated in 2002, and it has about 83 or 85 participants conserving over 100,000 acres of native plant habitat in Saskatchewan. Now, Rare Plant Rescue is unique because it involves our staff members coming out onto the land where the rare plants are located to conduct surveys and monitoring, which is something that we don't do for any of the other programs. We're very hands-off in general with our programs. It's just the landowners that are the ones who are aware of, best aware of, where the species at risk are on their land. And mostly, unless we're visiting the landowners to check up and check in with them, we don't go out to folks' land to check in on those species at risk. So now we're going to have a species at risk poll, and I hope that people are able to take part in it.
Okay, I've launched the poll here, and I'm going to give you all a little bit more time than I did last time. I don't know if people maybe are having an issue with being able to select the buttons, but it looks like, or maybe people don't have these or they haven't noticed them, but it looks like 0% for all 5 of your options.
That's okay. That's all right. I did want to make a note that probably one of the most challenging parts of being a habitat stewardship coordinator is when our landowners ask us, well, if I tell you which species at risk are on my land, won't that mean that you or the government will tell me that I can't manage my land in the way I want to, that I can't plant what I want to plant when I want to plant it, that I can't put my cattle out when I need to put them out in the paddocks or pastures where they need to go, and that I can't break native prairie and plant it to crops if I need to. And that's not the case. There are very few times when the federal or provincial governments, let alone any puny little non-government or nonprofit organization, can tell any landowner what to do on their land. So it's important that everybody understands that when someone enrolls in our programs, we ask that they allow us to share the quarter section where any species at risk is located. We don't share any names, we don't share any contact information. We just provide the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center with the quarter section where that species has been found. And that allows the federal government and the provincial government, who can access that data warehouse at the CDC, to make more appropriate population estimates that help decide whether that species needs to be delisted or whether it's doing okay. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about Nature Saskatchewan's Habitat Enhancement Program. So these enhancement programs were initiated in the year 2000, and the goal was to increase or improve wildlife habitat on people's land. So the sites have to be associated with a species at risk, and in our case, that's the burrowing owl, piping plover, and Sprague's pipit. So similar to what I did for the common nighthawk, I wanted to play the Sprague's pipit song for you, because the Sprague's pipit is mainly a little brown bird that you often don't see in the middle of the large tracts of land that it requires. It really requires a number of hectares of native grassland with a little bit of dead and down grass left over from last year. So often what people hear is their call, and I'm going to play that for you now. It's fairly distinctive. This is their flight song. So they give it when they're flying way up and high in the sky. So that's what pipits call its flight song. It's fairly distinctive. So if a person is interested in a habitat enhancement project, we have three options for them. One is native seeding, which is pretty self-explanatory. Another is called wildlife-friendly fencing, which is the placement of a barbless wire and a barbless wire on the top and a barbless wire on the lowest strand of a barbed wire fence. And this enables movement through that fence line by species like pronghorn antelope, which always go under a fence, and the barbless wire helps them not lose that strip of skin on their back. And the barbless wire across the top reduces injuries for deer and other large ungulates like that that are hopping over the fence. Our water development habitat enhancement projects are focused on piping plovers, and that is a design that allows landowners to pull water up and away from a shoreline where piping plovers may be breeding or nesting around a wetland or a lake. And it includes piping that water up to a catchment basin of some kind that allow cattle to drink from that upland area instead of walking down across the shoreline of that wetland and potentially disturbing or crushing the eggs and young of piping plovers. So Nature Saskatchewan shares 50% of the cost for seeding, fencing, or water development projects, and it's one of the supplemental handouts that I supplied Sask Organics with if you need any more details on those. So I've been talking a lot about our programs, but I haven't really talked about why it's important to conserve native prairie. This may be intuitive to a lot of people, but I wanted to mention that the Canadian prairies are the northern edge of the Great Plains, and the Nature Conservancy describes them as being 10% of the global grassland area. So there are a lot of threats to conserving or to native prairie areas, and only 13% of the native grasslands in Saskatchewan still exist. When native grasslands are broken by the creation of new roads or conversion to cropland or industrial and urban development, the habitat can be degraded by things like precipitation runoff or wind erosion, encroachment of weeds. It can also be fragmented, as it is in this picture, to the point where wildlife has a hard time moving from the place where they're born to places where they may need to find food to eat or even a mate that isn't related to them. And sometimes native prairie is just entirely lost. So when native prairie or native plants are conserved or reintroduced or restored, then the ecosystem function begins to return that land. So here's my little diagram. What we've got here is an organic blue flax crop. And you've all heard that introducing some native perennial or annual wildflowers can bring in pollinators. So let's say you decide to introduce some gaillardia and some prairie coneflower and maybe some milkweed. That is my picture of milkweed. And lo and behold, you discover that you're getting more pollinators to that field. So you think, well, let's add a whole bunch more. And indeed, you get quite a few more pollinators coming into your blue flax crop. So what you might or might not notice is that with that increased diversity of plants in that crop, you're also getting an increased diversity of seeds. And with those seeds, you might see, or you might not see, more seed eaters like rodents coming in. And with those rodents are going to become predators that eat those rodents. And if you're lucky, you might have something like a burrowing owl nesting in your buffer strip. You might also have bats that come in to feed on those pollinators that are accessing your field. You might have reptiles that come in to eat the insects as well as some of those rodents. If you're really lucky, you might have a Fruginus Hawk come down to feed on some of those rodents and maybe even some of the snakes. You might have badgers come in, which are really important because they're the people that dig the burrows for the burrowing owls. And you might begin to see more native migratory songbirds accessing your field to eat those insect pollinators, as well as other insect eaters like the northern leopard frog. So when you add pollinators to your cropland, you're not just adding producers or the flowering plants, but you're also adding consumers, the insect pollinators that eat the nectar from those plants. And by introducing the native plants, you're increasing your pollinators and the predators that eat those pollinators, herbivores that eat the seeds, and the predators that eat those predators that are eating those organisms. So by introducing all of those plants, you're increasing your pollinators and you're creating a food web of prairie organisms. If you think about what's happening below the soil, those deep roots of the native plants are taking hold and they're increasing percolation with every rain or snow event. And you're also increasing the wildlife presence, which leads to increased waste products and decomposition of their bodies, which can help your microorganism population. In all of these Stewards of Saskatchewan suite programs, there are 700 plus participants conserving over 300,000 acres of land. The stewards involved in our programs are the backbone of everything that we do, and they manage and care for the land and the creatures that live there. And if they weren't doing that important work, we might not have as much habitat available for our species at risk. We surely wouldn't have as much habitat available for our species at risk. We use species at risk ambassadors, but our goal is to increase biodiversity in the prairie on a whole. So I'm going to close here with a brief thanks to our funders and the extremely talented photo contributors that we have. And if you happen to spot a species at risk, please call the Hoot line at Nature Saskatchewan or go to the website and email the folks who are monitoring the emails to answer any questions you have about what you've seen. And with that, I will take any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Shirley. That was an excellent presentation. We do have one question here, so I'll start with that one. Does the taconid fly, I probably butchered that, attach to monarchs on your side of the Rockies, or our monarchs don't survive these attacks in general?
Yes, there are definitely taconid or tachinid flies that that can affect the, I think Stephanie's probably going to have to weigh in there, the pupal form, so the chrysalis of a monarch. And many of the monarchs I'm not going to say many. There's definitely a subset of the population of monarchs that are affected by the fly and that don't make it to adulthood.
Okay, thank you for that. And again, so while you were speaking, one of the things that sort of came to mind is that often when you're not from Saskatchewan or haven't transplanted yourself here, people think that, you know, the prairies are boring and there's nothing to see here. And so what I always respond to that is you have to get still enough to be able to see it, right? And I think that what your presentation has done has given us an opportunity to learn what to look for. So thank you for that. And so now that brings us to a close again for another webinar. And I would just really like to thank everybody for being here today. And a really big thank you to Stephanie and Shirley for the work that they do and their presentations. And again, just to remind you, this webinar has been recorded and you will be receiving a copy of the recording within 24 hours. And also you will, when you go out of the webinar, there'll be an opportunity to answer a short survey, and we'd really appreciate you filling that out to help us learn and to give us some thought for what we should do next. Thank you again to our sponsors, our gold sponsor Grain Millers, bronze sponsor Sunrise Foods International and ProCert. And just to remind you of our final webinar in our summer series, and it's Phos for Us, so managing phosphorus on organic farms. So I hope that you will join us on the 30th of July for that webinar. And that's it from us this time around. So thank you again for all being here. If you do think of some questions following the webinar, you can always email us at admin@sasporganic.com and we'll do our best to answer those questions. So thank you again, and see you next time, and have a great day.